This week, we talk enterprise security news, talking about how to create easy and open integrations with VMRay. Zimperium integrates Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection into their EDR. PacketViper Deception 360 is now available for Microsoft Azure. Up your vulnerability prioritization game with Tenable's new offering called Tenable Lumin. And say goodbye to Windows Server 2008 as well as Windows 7 as well. I did find one article that I thought was good. There's lots of articles on the topic, but I found one that I thought was good. The next segment, Mark Orlando joins us. He's the founder and CEO of Bionic to discuss outdated defenses and approaches that need revisiting traditional thinking about security operations in our enterprise. In the final segment, Ward Cobley, product line manager at Viavi Solutions, will discuss Visa's security alert and what we can learn from it. And actually, there was some interesting overlap in some research I've done on past carding scene, shenanigans, I guess you'd call them. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi network security solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. It's episode 168 for January 15th, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadoorian, joined by Mr. Matt Alderman, joining us remotely. Matt, welcome.
Hola.
And, of course, Mr. John Strand.
What just happened?
You all right? You get the fireplace in the background. It looks so quaint there in your office. Can you hear me okay, John? Are you being attacked by ninjas? He's being... We'll just go with...
Got something on.
Ninjas. FBI's knocking on the door.
Maybe.
Maybe.
It could be game and fish, wildlife, because
It could be.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a lot of wildlife around him. You never know.
I don't think he can hear us.
I'm back.
Oh, he's back.
I'm back now.
Hey, how's it going, John? Yes.
Sorry.
Game and wildlife or the FBI? Which one?
It was ninjas, the FBI, or game and wildlife.
Well, I told Matt the story about our baby deer from a couple of years back, but that's a long story we don't need to get into. No, it's just been insane. Wild West Hack and Fest coming up in March in San Diego. I think you guys are planning on coming down, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know if the San Diego one, but the one you're doing in South Dakota, I want to get more information on that and dates and stuff. See if we can work that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. As always, you guys have a booth. Just let me know.
Awesome.
But no,
That's a
other
road
than that,
trip
it's
for
been
me.
crazy.
It's a few hour drive.
Paul and I, but what's that?
I said it's only a few hour drive for me.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Matt's close.
Not that bad at all. But also, Paul, I've been kicking out the videos for Defensive Tradecraft Security Weekly, which is probably a bit of a mouthful, but Paul and I are working on more technical videos, and I'm doing some basics and fundamentals. I've been rolling those out over the past couple of days now.
I want to know how you pulled the fundamentals card, and I got the how you configure stuff in AWS card. Docker.
You chose that one.
Apparently, I hate myself. This is what I've found the past couple of weeks.
But I think that yours are going to get a lot more views because that's a huge growth area, right?
It is. It's a steep learning curve. To balance it out, I've been listening to a couple of books just before we do announcements. I did read 2 books. I'm almost done with the Cult of the Dead Cow book, which I don't know if it's got my recommendation because I listened to the books first, so I'm listening to it, and then like I'm messaging people, and I'm like, did it really happen like that? Because that's not what I heard.
Remember?
So there's some definite discrepancies in that book, and some disservice to people that I really like, which is interesting. So, and not so much applicable. I mean, it's cool to look into the history of the Cult of the Dead Cow, and there's a lot of cool like hacker culture moments. The release of Back Orifice at DEF CON is like a really a cool watershed moment. Thank you, John. In hacking history, but I did read, and I'll talk a little bit about this in our last segment. I did read Kevin Paulson's book, Kingpin. Finally, it takes me a while to get the CDC one's fairly new. Kingpin's been out for a while. About Max Vision, right? I thought if you're an enterprise defender, the reason I mentioned it on this show, it's a really cool look into the carding scene, especially. And I think gives you some really cool things to think about. Because, I mean, John and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, things don't work all that differently today.
No.
Right? I mean,
I think it's just more complicated and there's more of it. But yeah, it's the same.
And we'll talk about it, the chip and pin versus the magstripe reader, and it'll come into our final segment, and that there's still opportunities to do kind of that old school kind of carding stuff because chip and pin hasn't been implemented across the board. So really cool stuff.
Because we decided not to implement chip and pin, we decided to implement chip and sig, which was just crazy. The
chip is the important part, though, that I realized did make somewhat of an impact despite the implementation differences. So Kingpin, Kevin Paulson, definitely worth a read if you haven't read that already. The CDC book, like if you're on vacation and you want some entertaining kind of thing, it might be good to look back in history, but those are my book recommendations. Make sure you join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30th through April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners get 15% off the World Conference, the main conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020 and click the register button to register with our discount code. On to the enterprise security news. I think people are really holding back on their product announcements for RSA as that is coming up. We've got a webcast with RSA today, actually. Talk about the cool... one of the things they did, John, is the thing that we've always said we get as value from a conference, and that is they've made it much easier to network with people, right? They've got an app that if you're interested in the same things, you can meet with people who are doing the same projects. They've got space set aside for people to meet up and catch up. So they're kind of not... they're not formalizing Hallway Con. I think they're making it easier to have the Hallway Con, which we've always said is sometimes the best benefit you get from the conference.
Oh, let's be honest. A lot of people, whenever they go to cons, they maybe see 1 or 2 talks, but the most that they get out of it is the interactions with people in the hallway and little activities they do. So I think any good con should have lots of hands-on activity. It just shouldn't be the talks and the vendors. That's just being lazy.
Yeah, agreed.
You need the hallway con and the bar con because that's where the majority of things happen.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my God. Agree. Our bar con at Wild West Hackin' Fest this year was completely, totally insane. It was, the bar con can go a little bit off the rails, but in a fun way.
The way it should be. Yeah. And just keep it fun.
Yeah.
So your vulnerability prioritization now with Tenable Lumin. I didn't dig really deep into this article. I did. Because I'm assuming Matt was going to and give us lots of things to talk about. Because here we have, we got the big 3 vulnerability management vendors all trying to help you prioritize your vulnerabilities. Then we've got an entire, of course, market space within security that has arisen to help you with that. And there's a totally different set of vendors. So it's interesting. I don't know if there'll be a winner, but there's certainly multiple ways that we can slice this pie.
Definitely.
So I'm go ahead, Matt. You go first before I come and poop all over it.
Well, can I'm going to poop on it, and then I'm going to actually get into what they actually did. So here's my poop on moment. It's about freaking time. This has been in the works for 3 years. Okay, I mean 3+ years. And we finally get an announcement of where the capabilities are actually not bad, John. When you dig into, they finally added asset criticality into their calculation. This is the thing that's been missing out of the portfolio for a while. And every announcement they make, I keep digging, trying to find asset criticality. Asset criticality, is it there yet? This is the first announcement where I've seen asset criticality come in as one of the points to do the prioritization calculation. And so then, like a geek, I had to go dig in and go, okay, what is the asset criticality based on? So there is a white paper out there for anybody who wants to go register. They're going to make you give away your first child, by the way, to get access to the white paper. I'm just going to warn you now. You've got to give them everything: name, title, company, phone number, the whole 9 yards, and you're going to get blasted with a ton of emails. But there is a really good white paper that digs into the asset criticality rating and what is in it. So there's 3 core areas. So they have internet exposure, device type, and device functionality. And then it looks like for internet exposure, they look at internal and external. Okay, makes sense. Device type is either general or a computing appliance. And then device functionality gets into business purpose, software service, and deployment, right? I think I've given this example on this show before is, a high critical vulnerability on a test server it may not have that high of a prioritization because it's test server, right? So they factor that in. So you get a little bit of flexibility here in setting these different variables as part of your asset criticality that then factors in to the overall prioritization score for what they call their VPR, their vulnerability prioritization rating. So finally it's come together. It's just taken about 3 years to get here.
John?
So a couple of things. One, I think that this is a great move by Tenable from the perspective of marketing. And I need to explain why. Whenever people are talking about their security teams, one of the biggest things that they're always talking about is prioritization. Where does my team actually work? Where do they actually focus on? And okay, fine, that's great, I guess. But the issue isn't about setting up the proper criticality, it's about context. And I think that whenever you're looking at the asset criticality rating, that's a stab at that, but it's an incorrect stab at that. And the reasoning is, if you do a lot of assessments on a large number of different organizations, what you ultimately find is the vulnerabilities that are generally criticals and highs, especially external-facing vulnerabilities, are getting patched with very strong regularity. That's just basically where the vulnerability management process started about 15 years ago. You'd scan with Satan or you'd scan with Nessus. You'd find the most critical things, you would patch those, and then you would ignore literally everything else. You'd ignore every medium, low, and informational. However, if you actually sit down with people and do offensive cyber operations, and this, Paul, goes back to the days, if you remember, with carnal ownage, where they could go from where Chris was talking about going from low to owned or medium to owned.
Well, and
then
John,
we had
really quick side note on there.
Go ahead.
And I didn't know this, and this was in the CDC book by Joseph Menn that I read, that when Windows Snyder was at Microsoft, she was in charge of helping them prioritize their vulnerabilities. And she actually was in charge of Windows Service Pack 2, which, as we all know, made some great strides in security, which doesn't surprise me that she was at the helm in that division of Microsoft at the time. And before they were going to make one release, she was like, there's these 2 medium vulnerabilities, and we really need to address these before we release. And she lost that battle. And she said, well, what's going to happen is someone's going to take those 2 medium releases and they're going to do something bad with them and make us look bad. And that's exactly what happened. And after that, they listened to Windows Snyder about those medium, what she had to say, which they should have in the first place. But those conversations, I mean, that's all the way back early 2000s, right? Those conversations are still taking place. So
what I feel this does, honestly, is this creates a more complicated false sense of security, where you're like, okay, well, there's now this criticality score, there's this prioritization score, there's this asset criticality rating. We're going to do what the shiny Tenable or Qualys box or Rapid7 box tells us. When the reality is, if you're actually attacking these things, a lot of the vulnerabilities that we're successfully exploiting are actually lows and informationals, and sometimes mediums. And that's because these lower level vulnerabilities continue to get ignored again and again and again. And a lot of times they'll actually lead to exploitation. But if you're a manager, you want a shiny box to tell you this is what you have to focus on. And we've been fighting for that all the way back from CVSS. That's like, well, we need to have a score rating to identify what's critical and what's not. And it's always been problematic. So my fear is this is marketing. My fear is this is not going to make organizations more secure. My fear is this is going to further entrench organizations in just addressing the high and critical vulnerabilities because there's now more complicated risk rating associated with it. And, well, my fear is it's going to make my life easier. And that's the big problem that I see with this. And this isn't just this particular thing. Like I said, I love the people at Tenable. And I think there's very solid reasons why they drug their feet in doing this, but they had to be able to make sales and actually move through it. But whenever you actually get down to where the rubber meets the road, what vulnerabilities are being exploited and gaining access to environments, this whole idea of prioritization, only taking care of CVS scores 7 and above is complete garbage, and organizations need to do better. And there are ways we can do it easily.
But I still think we prioritize too heavily now on the remotely exploitable aspect of it. If there's a missing patch and a vulnerability associated with that missing patch that leaves you remotely exploitable, I mean, those are, everyone should just fix those. Like that to me still carries too much weight, because attackers today have been for some time gaining access to a user's workstation and then trying to move laterally. And that's where all those lows and mediums add up to be really bad. And let's face it, there's a huge difference between a missing operating system or software patch and some other condition that could lead to an attacker being successful in compromising your network. And those are the unknowns that really scare me. And I agree with John. I think we're building a false sense of security that if I continue to assess in the way that I'm assessing and address the highs and criticals, that I'm so-called safe. In fact, you're not. And I agree, you could be in a worse state if you're ignoring those other conditions in your network.
Yeah, here's one of the challenges. A lot of the misconfigurations that are addressed by the scanners show up as informational or lows, to John's point, right? Because they can't assign a criticality rating to a misconfiguration because there's no CVSS score for it. So it comes up as an informational, even though it has a major impact on how the box could potentially be exploited. This is where I think that the threat vulnerability management vendors have the advantage over the vulnerability management vendors, is that they are looking at exploitability and trying to understand what types of vulnerabilities could be exploited either remotely or locally, and using that as a higher rating function in how they're going to prioritize. And that's where, we had that really interesting interview with Kenna Security at the end of the year, Paul, on this show, and how they think about exploitability and how that factors into their prioritization. You don't see any of that here. This is just finally adding a third component outside of the CVSS score and any IOC threat intelligence correlation that they can do to finally bring asset criticality in. But this doesn't necessarily look at exploitability and some of the other things that some of the other vendors are looking at, which is going to continue to expand out this marketplace.
But I think, and this is
a project that Todd Beardsley is working on at Rapid7. So what he's working on is he's reached out to a number of different security firms, and the whole idea is he has this survey. Like whenever you're done with the pen test, you fill out the survey. There's no customer data associated with it, but it's basically what type of vulnerability was exploited and kind of setting up a better understanding of that exploitability. And I like Todd. Todd's awesome, right? And Rapid7's been doing a lot of really cool things lately. But I look at this as kind of that effort. Say, okay, we're going to take a step back from just doing vulnerability management. What is actively being exploited, instead of just focusing on what attackers are doing, because that's definitely a part that we should be looking at for threat understanding. But look at pen testers, because we can actually get a lot more refined and accurate data as far as what pen testers are actively exploiting. And I think that might be a project that'll pay out. At least I hope it does.
Well, and what you do with that data is you put it in a machine learning algorithm, and that's what helps you prioritize. And I know that sounds cliche and it's a buzzword, but there is definitely an application for that technology to help us solve this problem, because it's no longer there's a missing patch and it's been classified, right? If I look at the number of different ways in which you can manage your secrets in your application, right? Then I look at, in each one of those ways to manage your secrets, what configuration makes it more or less vulnerable, right? To have a human go do that across the board is very time consuming. To me, that's a task for some type of artificial intelligence. It doesn't need to know the details and be a human to tell the differences between the secrets. It needs to know that this secrets is different from this way of managing secrets, and then know in each one of those what the differences are in the configuration. That's what AI is really good at, right? It doesn't know what a 1 or a 2 is. It knows a 1 is not a 2, right? I think there's Ken was talking about using machine learning, I thought, in the appropriate way to do that. It sounds like by collecting that information from humans at Rapid7, they could also help us do the same thing.
Here's the good news.
And it's a collaborative effort, too. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Rapid7 just signed up to be a sponsor on the show, so maybe we can get them on to actually talk about how they're doing this.
And Todd's awesome, by the way. I love Todd.
Yeah. So one final thing, because I really want people to take something actionable. So if you're looking at your vulnerability assessment platform, if it exports the results based on asset, the IP address, and that's basically how you create your workload, that is incorrect. That's not the way that you address vulnerabilities in an organization. Instead, and this is one of the reasons why we love Tenable and we use Nessus, if you can export it by plugin ID in the actual vulnerability. And the reason why is you may have hundreds of IP addresses or thousands of IP addresses that are exhibiting the exact same vulnerability. It makes it a lot easier through automation, through Active Directory, group policy, through Puppet, Chef, Ansible, to address those vulnerabilities across your entire organization, across multiple systems, than it is to go to each individual system and try to fix them piecemeal. So if you're looking at these things, take it for what it's worth, but always go through and look at the vulnerabilities in your organization, not by asset, but instead by the vulnerabilities that are discovered, and then come up with an automated way of handling those vulnerabilities. And you'll be in a much better place.
John, you really liked the VMRay post that I put in there. That they have an open API, and I apologize, I don't remember exactly VMRay's position. They definitely have some threat intelligence about malware.
Yep. They're sandboxing. I hate to say just sandboxing, but yes, they're in that sandbox.
They're the smarter sandboxing. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's coming back to me now.
Yep. So the reason why I love this post is if you're a marketing person and you're listening to the show, because we know that there's a lot of you that do, because I know that you guys fear us now because we make fun of you. What Niles did is how it's supposed to be done. State the problem statement, talking about what the tool has and the various APIs that exist, talking about the fact that it exists, and then actually go through the code snippets and go through it. Because if you're reading this post and you're running through it, anybody that's reading this looks at this and they're like, oh, hell yeah, I could totally be able to write something that'll actually submit things to this various API. It's technical, it gets to the point, and it's just awesome. This is a great post.
So essentially, if you think that some executable that you have could be malware, you can use their API to upload it and get a report.
So you can upload a sample. You can check the status of that particular sample, seeing what it's coming through. You can get the severity of that particular sample, and then of course you can actually pull the full results analysis off of it as well. So it's all basically automated. So it's a cool post.
That's awesome. Virus Total and Intezer also being in that similar kind of space.
Yep.
Awesome.
By the way, can we talk about PacketViper deception?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's talk about deception. I love cyber deception. Just a fantastic thing, and now they're plugging it directly into Azure. Paul and I have written a book on this. We've written classes on this. And every single time we see a new vendor that's showing up and doing cyber deception, I'm like, oh, there they go. It's our little babies, Paul. But seeing this actually now moving into the Azure platform, specifically for Azure, I think is just one of the coolest things ever.
Yeah, one of the articles
Go ahead, Matt.
we covered on Monday on BSW was enterprise adoption of Azure over AWS, right? And what we're seeing is that enterprises who have primarily been Microsoft shops forever are tending to move when they move to the cloud, they're moving to Azure. So I think you're going to see more announcements like this because your traditional enterprise clients that you've been selling to are more likely to move to Microsoft Azure than an AWS or Google Cloud.
Absolutely.
And so I think you're going to see all these technologies go after Azure pretty heavily.
And look, we're actually thinking of moving to Azure for everything at VHIS as well. Google just doesn't give us the enterprise level capabilities that we absolutely have to have, especially from an audit and compliance perspective. So, and I think that there's a lower learning curve. And Paul, I'd like to get your opinion on this. When you're looking at AWS and implementing AWS, you're like, oh my God, this is all brand spanking new terminology. When you go to Azure, yes, there's new, but you're still using PowerShell. You're still talking about group policy. It seems to me like it's an easier transition from a learning curve perspective than it is just moving over to something like AWS.
Yeah, and there's different aspects of AWS that some are easier than others, right? It depends on what you're going after. I mean, if you're familiar with containers and EC2, you could likely move to ECS and even Fargate. I mean, Fargate definitely changes a lot of the terminology, but you can move to ECS. And it's not that bad. Like your compose files, there's basically missing stuff there, right? And some additional functionality, but it's all pretty familiar. But as you move into different Amazon services, what I'm finding is it's a rat hole. It's, to like use that service, then I have to integrate with that other service. And then like before you know it, you've got to learn and understand and test before you deploy like 6 different AWS services to accomplish your goal, right? So it's more of a rat hole. And each service, it depends. Like you may be familiar with it, and then other services you're like, oh my God, this is like brand new, right?
Yeah.
So to emphasize how smart Microsoft is in this, look at the article on Windows Server 2008 and look at the third option. You can now run your Windows Server 2008 in Azure, and they will give you 3 years of extended support updates for that environment.
Crazy.
Wow.
I mean, but it's brilliant, right?
Mm-hmm.
For organizations that cannot, for some reason, upgrade from 2008 server, Microsoft has said, look, you run it in Azure, we'll give you updates for it. This is how they're attracting those enterprises to come into their cloud environment. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, plus also, I would imagine, John, that if you're familiar with Active Directory, that's also the directory service in Azure. So, I mean, you should feel pretty comfortable, right? I think the big difference is if you're an Active Directory shop and you're looking at AWS or Google, it's not an Active Directory. I mean, they've got integrations, but they're not Microsoft, right?
Well, and the cost is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you start spinning up Microsoft services in Azure versus AWS, you're going to be paying a lot more in Amazon. So that's just, it's a simple numbers game at that point.
Right. Yeah, and there is a cost. I mean, that's what everyone's cautioning me. Like, that's great, but like, don't leave crap running out there and be mindful of how much you need to run in all your little options. I'm like, oh, great, we can host a database, but even the smallest instance is $100+ a month, right?
Yep.
And so you have to be able to justify that. And I think it is. Doug White brought up a great point yesterday. He was like, I know I could do a lot of what I'm doing in the cloud, and it would be $700 a month, right? He's like, the problem is the savings crosses multiple departments and barriers, right? Like someone else is paying the electric bill, someone else is paying the HVAC bill, someone else is doing the operations for the server room. That's a different budget from IT who's acquiring the servers, and then maybe research grants that are also buying the server. And all these are coming from different places. And there needs to be a C-level executive or team, multiple C-level executives working together to go, wait a minute, we can work together. And I know that $700 a month is a scary kind of figure, but we can save a lot of money if we do this. No, that's not every case, but I think Doug brings up a great point when you're moving to the cloud.
Absolutely.
We got to hit this one last article on Tinfoil and Synopsys.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, this just makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
It makes perfect sense. But the story behind this, I think, is a little more interesting, right? When we were doing the research at Tenable, I gave you the task to go out and test all these web app scanners.
Yeah.
Do you remember your top 3?
Yeah, Tinfoil was in the top 3.
It was.
It was a great platform, a great team, and an awesome product.
Yeah, it was NetSparker, Detectify, and Tinfoil were our top 3. Obviously, NetSparker has continued to grow. Their sponsor on the show. Detectify just took a funding round. Tinfoil just got acquired by Synopsys, who's a sponsor on ASW. It's just interesting to see how those three from 4 years ago, Paul, have continued to grow, expand, and move. But yes, I think this is a really good acquisition. It adds in a lot of API security capabilities into the Synopsys platform. So I think this is great for everybody.
Synopsys already has some kind of scanning component, right, that they acquired.
I don't think it's as robust, nearly as robust as Tinfoil's, though.
Yeah, I think there's different capabilities, and I can't remember who Synopsys acquired for that.
Coverity? I think Coverity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Cigital. See, they've acquired a ton of AppSec companies over the past few years, right? So Cigital, Coverity, Black Duck. I mean, there's a bunch of those in there. Is it Seeker? This adds some API-specific capabilities, and I think also augments some of their other dynamic scanning capabilities.
And Tinfoil was a lot more developer-focused, not so much IT or security team-focused, which is why I thought it made a great addition to the Synopsys suite of tools.
Yep.
So good for them. Congrats to the Tinfoil team. We're saying goodbye to Windows Server. We talked about that, and there was a ton of articles about Windows 7 being end of life. I don't know if you guys had any comments.
Boring.
It's boring, right?
It's boring.
The Windows 2008 stuff was a lot more interesting. But if you're running Windows 7, your Enterprise Security Weekly tip of the week is get the hell off Windows 7 now. There you go. That's that.
And there's also a lot, but there's also a lot of much better options that you can apply to Windows 7, because we can't all just do a finger snap with our Infinity Stones and make Windows 7 go away. There's an interim period where you may have to be running Windows 7, and there's a lot better options, I think, for endpoint security products to be on those, either in the operating system or in your applications or both, to hold you over. Where I completely agree with John. You should be on Windows 10.
Yeah, this whole Windows 7 to 8 to 10 is why I'm a Mac user now.
I've got to use Mac for video production now, and I hate it. I've been using Linux, and that it's not a conversation I want to get into. But going back to the OS X interface, I'm just like, this sucks. It was amazing a few years ago, but now they need to change up their UI quite a bit.
A couple of stories. Neustar is offering flexible customer identity authentication solution. Zimperium is integrating with Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Is Microsoft Defender something people should be running, John, or in the enterprise is it?
Defender? Hell yeah. In the past year, we just did Sacred Cash Cow tipping.
Yeah.
Last week, and I think we had 1,500 people show up live. I'm not sure, but it was a huge turnout. And Windows Defender is now no joke. If you talk to a lot of security testing firms, they'll flat out tell you it's not a joke at all. Windows has come on strong. And really, when you're looking at EDR, this is probably a segment we should get into. Most of the time, whether or not your EDR is good or it's crap is more to do with configuration than the actual product itself. Yeah. But no, Windows Defender is very, very, very solid. Definitely gets a thumbs up from our team.
Awesome. Well, that will conclude the Enterprise Security News segment for today. Stay tuned for our interviews coming up next.